Hey guys, as you can see, it's the next day. It is really early morning. We are going to be going and picking up Nick, who is the owner of Virtual World Entertainment. He is flying in for the B-17 for the air show this weekend that we'll be going to on Saturday. So we'll be getting a late start today on the pods. I think I have narrowed down what the issue is with the video on this one. I think it's just a bent connector. I haven't bothered to look yet, but in my experience, that's what it is. And then hopefully we'll start on pod 2. Well, this is pod 2, but the second pod, rather. Hopefully get some cool shots of the B-17. It's the Texas Raiders. Alright, back from getting Nick, and B-17's flying in, but it's going to be a little bit, so I'm just going to go see it this weekend at the air show. But we're going to start chasing down some gremlins on this pod, see if we can figure out the video issue as well as the Rio. And then we're going to start wiring the second pod and get it as up and operational as we can, and then we can start finding components to hopefully get these going. So, here we go. Okay, so what I've done so far is I have taken everything out, secondary bezel, top 3 MFDs, and I took out the radar screen, seat rails, and I proceeded to clean everything. So before, when I did the floor on this one, I did the drill brush again after spraying it, and then did the rag, and it was nasty. Since then, I have masked off and spray painted everything to make sure that it's nice and clean again and looks nice and black so it doesn't have the metal shining on the player as they go. Problem with that is if it has shiny, it's going to reflect onto the screen, then you're going to be moving your head trying to figure out where everything is. So where I'm at with this guy now is I'm going to start wiring, let the paint dry for a little bit. I'm going to let it vent out from in there. I am in a garage, so it is ventilating rather nice, but I'm going to give it a few minutes, that way I don't sit there and inhale fumes the entire time. But it is a pretty warm day. All the wiring that was there is now over here. This was for the secondary screen, which we no longer use in this because we have an LCD. I have cleaned up and painted the bin. The seat unfortunately has a pretty large tear in the top of it, but I have done the amazing zip tie fix for the springs. Satin it. It'll support my fat butt. That's where we're at. We are going to attempt to power it up. I made the mistake before of trying to power it up when I still had all the wires for the top MFDs. They were going across the flyback, and I heard a nice loud pop, smelled some burning, and realized the error of my ways and decided to actually route the wires. So now inside, all 3 MFDs are up top, all the wires are hooked up. The lower right and lower left MFD are there. You can see that the secondary is completely out at the moment, and I'll put that back together here shortly. I was just waiting for the paint to dry. Rear is all cleaned, everything underneath is clean. This is where the 2 button boards for the joystick and throttle go. So they should be in this cubby hole, which sits behind the seat. Now the biggest flaw with that is these were put into family fun centers, so anytime somebody spilled something, that's right where it went. But there you go. Progress so far. And we still have a whole lot of bolts and parts. There's all the bolts we still have to put together on this. And we're making great progress. Okay, at this point everything is hooked up, everything's buttoned up, all the components are back in. The only thing left is the PC. I'm not doing the top and bottom light yet. They're the last thing. It doesn't really matter at this time. I'm going to hook up the PC, see if it gets on the network, start testing all components so far as buttons and screens. If it comes on the network, I'll be able to have a second pod to test. So great news. Pod 1, you know about what's wrong with it. The top MFD button boards don't work. The Rio board is what's bad. I need my buddy to show up so we can throw it on a diagnostic and check it. Pod 2, however, I powered it up with the exception of the rear hat switch to look behind you. Everything inside is 100% operational. All screens work, all buttons work, everything. Foot pedals, you name it. This one has one minor gremlin, which is the rear hat switch. So for that, it's either A, the micro switch on the rear hat switch itself, highly unlikely, B, a wire from the hat switch down to the coupler at the bottom of the joystick, probable, C, from the coupler at the bottom of the joystick to the button board. It's only one of those. So I'm banking it's a wire, so I'll start tracing it next. I'll bench test it, and we'll see what it is. But that's great news. We are really close for the barbecue. This pod, completely playable. The only mechs that really require the rear hat switch are like the Templar or something with rear-facing lasers, but with the barbecue a few days away, it'll be good. The only issue I ran into was this Cat 5. I ran it the entire way without testing it first, and it has a bad connector. Instead of redoing it, I have a box full of Cat 5, so I'm just going to use some of that. I'll save it though, because I'll redo the connector at a later date. Alright, so we're going to bench test the joystick. When we press back on the hat switch, it does not work. Trigger works, top missile works, forward hat, left hat, right hat all work, lower thumb works, and pinky works. So to test it, we're going to take our ohm meter, or multimeter. We're going to set it to the speaker, which is going to send a small current through these wires. And when they connect, you'll hear a beep. This is a lot easier with two people, but so we're going to set our black on the common wire, our red on the red wire. When we pull the trigger, we should hear the connection happen. So going down this line, it's real quick that we hit our issue, because the second one should be rear hat and it's not working. So with that, we know for a fact that it is in the joystick, it's not a ribbon cable or anything beyond. Because here I'll do forward hat, go down the line to the next, should be left or right hat next, left hat, go to third, which should be the pinky, then our middle, and then final, our top missile. Now, if you hit any other button and it makes a sound, that means you've got a break in line. So in this case, our rear hat is the orange wire. So we are going to trace the orange wire back to the base first. It runs through here. We're going to trace it through the base first, and there's a coupler right here, and we're going to see if it's there or if it's actually in the hat switch. Alright, so to disassemble this, it's a security torque right here. This will hold the top half of the joystick to the base. They're just security torques. Next, your joystick should lift off. Here's our coupler. So what I like to test here is the exact same test we did prior, but I like to eliminate the base first. So we know it's the orange wire. So with that being the orange wire, we're going to go ahead and touch one to the orange. Find and touch the other one. Alright, so that is a connection on the base itself from one end to the other, so we can eliminate the entire base. We know for a fact our issue lies with this top part of the joystick. So now we're going to disassemble it. So to disassemble it, it's pretty easy. This is the one that the techs love to work on, the one that the pilots don't like. Okay, bunch of skin or something in there from somebody. The two halves will now separate. There we go. The reason I took that nice and easy is there's a spring on this trigger that has to go in between the two. So you have to fit it into there, otherwise it won't work. So at this point we can now try and trace our orange wire. We can see it is into the bottom, so it's not that. If we pop out the hat switch, and we look at the hat switch, we can see it's actually into the hat switch. So from that point we will actually, it is clicking, so we're going to test it again, but at the micro switch itself. So we'll put one end on the orange and the other end on the common. Trust me, this is easier with two people. Nothing. Alright, so that means we have a bad micro switch. The thing I said that it more than likely was not. So now we're going to disassemble and we're going to take out the micro switch. Thankfully I've got a pile of spares. Okay, in case anybody was wondering what's 30 feet long and will cause you an immense amount of headache working on these things, It's called a upper ribbon cable. That's Jeremy.
What's up?
So what he ended up doing is he took one of the spare Rio boards. So we found a fourth chip is socketed there. Let's see if we can get it to focus. There we go. So he went ahead and replaced it, and the issue persisted. So we ran another bench test. We've got the whole top half ripped apart. We ran another bench test, and it worked when this ribbon cable was not plugged in. So we made a new one. We're going to test it outside first and see if it works on those 3 MFDs. If so, we'll button it all back up. A wild chorus sorts chips.
Oh, yo.
So we had a mountain of chips, and none of them were labeled. So Jer is being nice enough to go through every one of them and cross-check. We have how many Rio Com chips?
8.
So owners that I know need Rio Com chips, we have 8. We have a surplus. We have 2 spare Rios. We got one of them fully working. The issue with Pod 2 turned out to be 2 of the 3 top MFDs, the button boards were bad. On top of that, the port, the chip for the port for the upper ribbon cable was bad, which he replaced. So we had 2 issues. And just to be safe, we replaced the entire line. It hadn't been changed since the 90s. It was 1995 was the date code that it had on it. So we figured it was time to replace it. Now, he's probably correct that we shouldn't have done the full 30 feet. We should have cut it down a little bit, because now we have about 8 feet extra. Well, maybe not that much, but either way, I need to put a resistor at the end of it. But we've done a couple play tests on both pods going against. We've got the printer running, and you can now play a full game, as we will show you next. Well, there you go, guys. Both of them are working. We're able to play, get printouts, kill many things, lots of explosions.
Many explosions.
Diggities. Lots of death.